Hello and welcome back to my chess course, how to play with or against an isolated pawn. If a strong chess player plays against an isolated pawn, it's very important to know the strategy. The importance of this topic is related to the fact that isolated pawn can arise from a huge number of openings. Queen's Gambit, nimzo-indian defense, French defense, caro-kann defense, and even Sicilian defense. The basic move order is a Queen's Gambit accepted. d4, d5, c4, d takes on c4, knight f3, knight f6, e3, e6, bishop takes on c4, c5, castle, bishop e7, knight c3, c takes on d4, e takes on d4. And now white plays with isolated pawn on d4. Also possible is the line d4, d5, c4, d takes on c4, e3, e5, bishop takes on c4, e takes on d4, e takes on d4, and knight f6. And again, white has an isolated pawn on d4. The position with the isolated pawn can be achieved in some popular lines of nimzo-indian defense. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, e3, c5, bishop d3, d5, knight f3, castle, castle, and knight c6. Black's plan is to capture on d4 with the pawn and then take the pawn on c4. The similar position can be arised from terrace defense, which can lead to an isolated queen's pawn on either side. For example, c takes on d5, e takes on d5, and d takes on c5. Now, black has an isolated pawn on d5. If white plays e3 here, then c takes on d4, e takes on d4, and d takes on c4. And now white has an isolated pawn on d4. The e-pawn openings are not immune either. For example, French defense. e4, e6, d4, d5, e takes on d5, e takes on d5, and c4. If black takes on c4, white has an isolated pawn on d4. Another line in French defense. e4, e6, d4, d5, knight d2, and c5. E takes on d5, e takes on d5, d takes on c5, and now black has an isolated pawn on d5. White can also get an isolated pawn from caro-kann defense. e4, c6, d4, d5, e takes on d5, c takes on d5, and c4. It is called Panov attack. If black takes on c4, white will play with isolated pawn on d4. You can also meet an isolated pawn in Russian game. e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6. Knight takes on e5, d6, knight f3, knight takes on e4, d4, d5, bishop d3, and later white plays c4. If black takes on c4, then again we see an isolated pawn on d4 for white. You can also meet an isolated pawn in Sicilian, for example in a Lapin variation. e4, c5, c3, d5, e takes on d5, queen takes on d5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, bishop g4, bishop e2, and now Black plays c takes on d5. C takes on d5, and again an isolated pawn on d4. There are also other openings when you can find a position with an isolated pawn. That's why I consider an ability to play with and against isolated pawn to be one of the most important skills for a strong chess player. Okay, thank you for your attention. We will continue in the next lecture.